Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Drayton live stream. So tonight we're going to have a closer look at the underfloor heating controller. Now, you would have seen I did an overview a couple of weeks ago when we launched the new hardware. So tonight we're going to have a look at the underfloor heating controller and what its purpose is really, and how we go about installing it, both in terms of physically wiring it up, but also how we would architect a system that's got the underfloor heating controller in it, and then how we would add it using the app. So let me kick off by sharing this with you. So I'm just going to go through firstly and just give you an overview, of a bit of a recap on what the underfloor heating controller can do. So this is for managing your multi-loop wet underfloor heating. So if you've got a wet underfloor heating system, particularly if you've got multi-loops, it's unlikely that you're going to use this if you've just got one zone of underfloor heating, but you could do. It's slightly overkill, but this is really if say for instance all of your downstairs is managed with wet underfloor heating. It's likely that you're going to have a controller like this, and this is essentially going to wire out to the thermal actuators that are going to be sat on top of your underfloor heating manifold. So we can manage a total of 14 actuators spread across 6 different banks, and each bank is able to be controlled by a 𝗲𝘀 smart room thermostat. So as well as having this controller and your hub, you're going to be using a 𝗲𝘀 smart room thermostat for every single one of those banks, 1 to 6 that you can see there, to control the respective bank of thermal actuators. And depending on which bank you use, depends on how many thermal actuators you can wire back to that. So we've tried to make it as simple as possible, and you'll see this from when we go through the installation that we've got the screwless terminals. It's also quite a small form factor. It's quite a small unit, and that's designed to fit inside a metal enclosure. Typically, we don't do that in this country. However, it's quite nice that it's the size it is, and if you compare it to our competitors, we are one of the smaller units. Nice thing about this, you've got heating and cooling. So this is very much in tune with this idea of if we're using heat pumps as our source of heating or indeed cooling. You can use the cooling functionality. So if you want to cool as well as you cool your underfloor heating, for instance, you can do that. And with that, you're going to use the dew sensor to manage the condensation. We've also got the capability for a floor sensor. So if you've got sensitive floor coverings and you want to make sure that you don't exceed a certain temperature, we can do that. And you've also got pump contacts to run the pump on the manifold. And you've also got a boiler contact, which you don't have to use. You can either use the contact within this, or you can use the contact in the hub. Remember, this is an addition to your 𝗲𝘀 hub. You're going to need to have a hub that comes in a thermostat kit or a multi-zone kit, and this is an accessory that you will use with it. Now, from the installer's point of view, you can set it up without Wi-Fi. And this is a really good thing. That's been the thing about 𝗲𝘀 all the way through, is you've never had to have an internet connection or Wi-Fi in order to be able to set it up. But this goes one step further, in so much as you don't even need the hub to be able to set this up. So if this is one of the first things that's going in as part of your installation, you don't need to have the hub powered up and this added to it. You can use the override button to actually step through and open the respective loops, make sure your thermal actuators are opening. So, essentially making sure they're connected to the correct bank. But from a venting and filling point of view, you can sequence through and make sure you only open the loops that you want, just using the override button. And then with the view that in the future, then you would add the hub, you would add this as a device on the network, the devices network. So it makes setting up really easy. There's also some smart features in so much as it manages the load. So if you've got all 6 of your zones, your underfloor heating zones were to come into an on period or call for heat all at once, it doesn't just put them all on and risk overloading the system. It will stagger through. So bank 1 will fire. There will be a 30-second delay, and then bank 2, another 30-second delay, bank 3, and so on. So it manages the load, and you don't have to have just one of these on the system. You can have up to 3. So if you've got a really large multi-loop hydronic underfloor heating system, you can add another 2 of these, and then you will have each one of those will have 6 zones. And that will take you up to your maximum 16 zone limit with 𝗲𝘀. So just a brief overview of the architecture of 𝗿𝗀𝗁. Obviously, you know the hub, that's the center of your system. That's really got three functions. It wires into your system, so it gives you the all-important interlock, which means if there's no call for heat, it's got the capability to shut down the boiler or tell the air source heat pump not to, to ramp down. It connects to Wi-Fi, so that gives you your cloud service. So it's got a Wi-Fi chip in there. You don't have to use it as part of the, or you don't have to connect to Wi-Fi as part of the setup process, but it's there so that it can see out, it can see the 𝗿𝗀𝗁 cloud service, and that gives the customer cloud services, remote access, integration with different IoT services like Alexa and Google, that sort of thing. And most importantly, it also broadcasts its own separate network that the devices sit on. So the devices that you can see connected here, they're not connected to the home Wi-Fi, they're connected to the devices network that is broadcast as soon as you power up the hub. Now the 𝗿𝗀𝗁 plug in the top right hand corner, that's used if you want to control appliances, but it's also a range extender for that device's network. So as you build up the network, it's likely that you're going to have more than one 𝗿𝗁𝗁 plug if you've got the need to be able to spread the range, or indeed increase the number of devices that can be routed. Each one of those plugs will handle 6 devices. But the essence is, because the 𝗿𝗁𝗁 plug is mains powered, it forms an access point. The other devices, the smart radiator thermostats and smart room thermostats, whilst they sit on this network, because they spend most of their time asleep, you can't route other devices, or you can't mesh. They won't mesh together because they spend most of their time not there. The mains powered stuff is there all the time, and therefore it acts as a range extender. So consequently, the 𝗿𝗁𝗁 underfloor heating controller, that's a mains powered device. So that, as well as being able to manage your wet underfloor heating, it also forms an access point for other devices to route through. So the principle here is the more of these that you have on the system, or the more mains powered 𝗿𝗁𝗁 devices you have on your system, the less reliant you are on the 𝗿𝗁𝗁 plug in order for range extension. You can still use the 𝗿𝗁𝗁 plug if you want to control appliances, and it's an elegant way of doing that, but you don't absolutely have to have them from a range point of view, because the underfloor heating controller, same as the electrical heat switch, it's mains powered, and therefore it forms an access point that allows other devices to mesh through it. So let's have a closer look at the hardware itself. So on the top rail there, we've got the setup button. This is the button that you're going to use when you're adding the underfloor heating controller to the 𝗿𝗁𝗁 network. It coincides with the setup light, so that indicator shows you exactly what's going on with the system at any particular time. Should be green. If it's red, you know that there's something wrong. Also, the setup button that you've got there, if you press and hold it down, keep it held in for 20 seconds. That's how you do a factory reset on it. So that's a really important button for when you're going through actually adding this device to the 𝗿𝗁𝗁 network. Now, this here is the all-important override button that I mentioned, and this is the one that allows you to go through and open each individual loop. So fire each bank 1 to 6 individually, so that you can fire each one, so that you can open it, check that it's working. It's also your override button. So if everything goes wrong and you really need to drive heat into the underfloor heating system, you can use that override button to step through. And I'm going to actually do a video on one of these training sessions is going to be devoted to what happens if things go wrong. So it's going to be all of the different reset procedures, but it's also going to show you what you have to do if you want to override. So you essentially use this button, you pick which zones you want to fire, you then confirm it. Not only does it open the respective loops, or the respective banks on 1 to 6, it also fires the pump interlock, and it also fires the boiler interlock as well. Now, this is a little indicator to show you whether you're in cooling mode or heating mode. If you're in heating mode, it doesn't display at all. If you're in cooling mode, it displays this little snowflake symbol, and I'll show you in a minute how you drive this into cooling mode. You've then got your indicators to show which banks are active. Now, these aren't just on or off. So if the light is bright, it means that the bank is actually active and it's firing. There's a call for heat, and and the thermal actuator contacts will have gone live. But you've also got a sort of dimmer light that comes on with these to show you if the 30-second delay is active. So if all of your zones come into an on period and they all call for heat at once, it's likely that bank 1 will fire, so that will go bright, but the other banks will sit there with a slightly dimmer green light. So it's showing you that there is a call for heat, but it's telling you that the bank hasn't actually fired yet because it's been staggered with this 30-second delay. And then as that 30 seconds times out, the light will then brighten. You'll hear the relay click, and that will then open that bank. This is your symbol to show you that your pump is active. This is the symbol for, or the little indicator to show that the boiler interlock is active. Now, you don't have to use the interlock here. It's optional. You can use the interlock within this, or you can choose to fire one of the relays that's in the WISER hub. So if you're on a single channel, it's relay number 1. If you're on a 3 channel, you've got the choice between channels 1 and 3. And then this is the all-important power indicator. So you would expect to see that green all the time. Otherwise, it rather suggests it's not got any power. Let's pop the cover off and top rail. Now, this here is where you will connect your floor sensor and your dew sensor. First 2 terminals are for the floor sensor, and the second 2 are for the dew sensor. Now, these sensors are coming. They're going to be out, I would imagine, before the end of the year. But they're not available at the moment, but they are coming. This is your contact for cooling. So this is how you can throw the system into cooling mode, and it's a 240-volt contact. The first terminal would be neutral, and then the second terminal, there, C2, I believe it is defined. We'll have a closer look at that in a minute. That's your live. It's likely to be coming from some other control, maybe from your air source heat pump or your ground source heat pump. That if it goes into cooling mode, it then tells the underfloor heating controller to go into cooling mode, and that just flips the logic. So rather than if your ambient temperature is below set point, there's a call for heat. That's if you're in heating mode. If you're in cooling mode, it just flips it. So if it's above, it won't actually do anything. So these are your screwless terminals. So you can see banks 1 and 2 have got the capability to add or assign or indeed wire in 4 thermal actuators per bank. Number 3 and 4 are 2 thermal actuators per bank, and 5 and 6 are singles. Doesn't matter, you don't have to populate them all, but it gives you the capability for 14 thermal actuators. This is where you would connect your pump. So you would bring your supply in on the left-hand side, on the left-hand 2 terminals. The 2 middle terminals are for your earth continuity, so an earth in and an earth out. And then the right-hand 2 are the load to the pump. So your neutral for your pump, which is again unswitched, it's just banked to the neutral that's coming in. But you can see there on the L2 there for the pump, that is where your pump live will go, and that's so it's single pole switching for your pump. And then you've got the same arrangement for your boiler interlock. This is volt free in actual fact. So whatever you bring in on the left-hand bank is what will go out on the right hand. So if you need to, you might just split off of the main incoming live on the furthest 2 terminals, these 2 here, which is your mains in. You may just take a live, you just split off, or it may be that you're using a live from maybe a zone valve, perhaps maybe the grays of the zone valve you're going to put in there, and that's then going to go back out. So depends how you want to do it. You've got onboard protection with this. This is an onboard fuse. So if anything goes wrong, as well as your 3 amp fuse spur, which should be at the head of your system, you've also got this fuse here, which is managing or indeed protecting anything that's connected to the underfloor heating controller. These are your cable grips. So this again, they're push-in. So there's no screws or anything. You just push your cable into there. Now the thermal actuator cables tend to be 2-core, and it tends to be a flat cable. So that's why where you see that they're assigned for the thermal actuators, it's much smaller. Over to the right-hand side, where you're going to have things like pump and boiler interlock and contacts, you've got slightly bigger cable entry there. But again, same principle. Push them in. On the bigger ones, you've actually got like a clip at the bottom that sort of locks it in. On the smaller ones, it's just a friction fit. And lastly, this is where you connect your external antenna. Now, if you think of everything else with WISER, all of the antennas for the devices to connect to the device's network are internal. You don't see them. With this, because it's got the capability that it might be fitted inside a metal enclosure, you've got the you've got the external antenna which screws in, and I'll give you a closer look at that as we get through. So this is how you would actually set up the architecture of the system. Each one of those banks, for as many as you want to use, and you don't have to use all of them, but here we're showing the complete suite. So each one of those will have a WiSA smart room thermostat assigned to it. So if you're buying the underfloor heating controller with a view of using all 6 banks, you're going to purchase the controller itself plus 6 of the room thermostats as spares. Now here I'm showing you that you can see that banks 1 and 2 are actually calling for heat. So the relay inside is actually fired and it's outputting to those 2 banks of thermal actuators. You can see 3, 4, 5, and 6 are just a very they're sort of at half brightness. That means that the 30-second delay is active. So when that time's out, 3 will fire, you'll get another 30 seconds, then 4 will fire, and so on. But I mentioned you can use multiples of these, so you can have obviously going to have your WiSA hub at the center of your system. You're then going to have as many underfloor heating controllers, up to a maximum of 3, to fulfill the amount of thermal actuators or the amount of manifolds that you want to manage. You're then going to have your WiSA room stats that you will assign to it. But there's nothing stopping you mixing this up and having a radiator system as well, and that's going to be quite likely. It's most likely you'll have underfloor heating downstairs, and then upstairs you're going to then want to get your multi-zoning using the WiSA smart room thermostats. And you need to stick within the device limit. So total number of zones. Now, zones are the virtual rooms that you divide your house up into. So you can have 16 of those. And within those zones, you can add a maximum of 64 devices. Well, it's actually 63 because the hub counts as one of your devices. So you're going to be one down straight off the bat because the hub takes one of those positions. So 63 devices, and that then disseminates into 16 smart room thermostats. So you can't have more than 1 room stat per zone because it doesn't make any sense to. But you can have multiple radiator thermostats per zone because it's quite likely you might have a zone that's got more than 1 radiator. So up to 4 radiators per zone, 3 underfloor heating controllers, 16 of the WiSA electrical heat switches, and then in addition to all of that, you've got your 10 WiSA plugs. So you can see WiSA has now become a really nice solution to be able to manage not only your wet heating system in terms of your radiators. We can now do underfloor, we can now do electrical heating, and we can control appliances using the WiSA plugs. So this is a real world installation that I did. So remember, we're just doing the controls. So anything downstream from the controller is not going to be Drayton kit. So you can see here, we've got this underfloor heating controller. Now we've actually got 2 different brands of thermal actuator that are on there. The white ones are Salus and the blue ones are unbranded. But ultimately, the important thing is that they are 230-volt thermal actuators, which means we can wire them back to the WiSA underfloor heating controller. So where the underfloor heating controller is, there was just a generic underfloor heating wiring center that was taking inputs from wired thermostats. Those wires have been made safe because we don't need them anymore, because remember, you're going to use the WiSA room thermostats as your sensing and controlling device. So the amount of wires that you need to run to this are immediately reduced. The only wiring we need is power in. We've got our interlock there, so we're actually going to use this, the interlock here, to open our zone valve to actually kick the boiler in. This was on a gas boiler system, but we didn't need to. If it would be more convenient, we could have fired one of the relays in the hub, and you'll see that when we go through the installation. You can see here setup light is red, which means that I haven't yet added it to the system. but I am able to control. You can see here I've fired banks 1, 2, and 3. We've got the red light, which tells us that we're not paired to a hub, but it doesn't matter. At this stage here, I'm just making sure that all the wiring is correct and the relevant thermal actuators are opening. And lastly, you can see the benefit of being able to have the external antenna. So right near where the underfloor heating controller is, there's a conduit running across the top there, and there's some quite hefty cables. I think there's a shower cable in there. So I was just mindful. I wanted to move the antenna away from that, and I was able to do that by using that external antenna. So this is a close-up of the wiring inside. So this is that's our mains in. So you can see that the cable is retained by the cord grip at the bottom, and then we've just got the push-in terminal. So you push on the white part of the terminal, that opens the terminal. Pop your cable in. Now you want to be using something that's either, the cables need to either be tinned. If they're stranded, they need to be tinned. If they're solid, you don't need to. Or if they are stranded, use something like a 𝗵𝗲𝘁𝗶𝗴 crimped on the end, just to make sure that you can manage the strands. So push down on the white, insert the wire, release the white, and then that will retain. And if you need to disassemble that, then you can. It's just the reverse of it. There's a close up of the external antenna. So it's got a sticky, self-adhesive pad on it. So peel off the backing, and then you can stick it wherever you want. And just remember, it's quite easy. It's separate in the box. It doesn't come connected. So just remember before you power anything up to make sure that you've got the antenna connected. And now I'm going to just have a bit of a deeper look at this cooling mode. So remember, these two terminals here, I said are the sort of the cooling interlock. So C1 is a neutral. So those two terminals are expecting to see a potential difference of 230 volts. So C1 is your neutral, and then the C2 would be your live, which is going to be your signal coming from probably the air source heat pump via the interface unit, something like that. There we've got our the interlock connected there. But the upshot is, if you see 230 volts across those two terminals, it drops it into cooling mode, and you can see that where you get the flame symbol if there's a call for heat, if there's a call for cool. So you can see here that the ambient temperature is greater than the set point, which is why there is a call for cool. You get the snowflake symbol. Right, now to the app. So how do we add this to our system? So I'm going to take you through the installer journey here. And remember, that's the bit where we don't get involved with Wi-Fi or anything like that. So you're going to be doing this on your own phone. So you're going to be download the app to your phone, hit get started. We now ask you for your regional variation. So obviously we're going to choose United Kingdom if that's where we are. And then that gives us the two options of what we are going to install. Now, we've got 𝗵𝗲𝘁𝗶𝗴, which obviously is for WiSA. Remember that the new Digistat, the third generation Digistat, now has got Bluetooth connectivity, and it uses the WiSA app. So that's why you see Digistat there. So again, if you're setting up Digistat, you want to be owning the process, doing it on your phone, but you'll pick Digistat, and then that will take you on the Bluetooth journey. If you pick the hub, that then takes you on the Wi-Fi journey. Begins by hitting the setup button. So we want to get that setup light flashing. Once it's flashing, we know it's broadcasting the small access point that we're able to connect to be able to get in and configure. The app then invites you to open your Wi-Fi settings, and when you go in there, you can see I'm connected to a Wi-Fi network called Customer Services. But down the bottom there, we've got this access point called WiSA 88. The 036FA2 is the unique MAC address for this device. It's sort of the serial number for it, so it's well worth making a note of that. If you don't get it from here, it's also on the QR code on the back of the control itself. But when you click on that, it will tell you it's an unsecured network, and it will then tell you that there's no internet connection. But the important thing is we want a stable connection to it. Now, the reason there's no internet connection is because we're not connecting to a Wi-Fi router. We're connecting to a device that we're trying to get in and configure. So we're just using the fact that the hub has got a Wi-Fi chip in it to connect to it, rather than plugging a lead into it. Historically, you would have used maybe a USB lead or an Ethernet cable if you want to talk to something. We're now just doing it. We're just making use of that Wi-Fi chip that's in there to be able to get in and configure it. Once you're there, background your settings and foreground the WiSA app. And you can see now we've got the continue button is now livened up. It's now green. We hit that. We get confirmation that we're connected to the hub. And now we're really in. So it doesn't matter if you're going in as an end user or an installer. You've got to get your device, your phone or iPad or whatever, talking to the hub. And so you'll go through that process that we've just gone through. Once you're in there, this is now where you choose the route you want to go on. So it's a gas boiler. If you go into that, that will give you your options to choose anything from electric boiler to heat pump, and that's just managing the cycle rates. Next, talks about connecting to Wi-Fi. This is very much in the domain of the end user. So we're going to use the skip button, and in doing so, it gives you the prompt to say, if you don't do this, you won't be able to register. Obviously, we're not interested in registering as the installer, so we'll just hit continue. And you're then at this landing page where we're going to be adding devices. Now, it tells you here, the first thing, if you're adding underfloor heating device, you want to add that first. So before we do anything else, anything with radiator thermostats, we get the underfloor heating in. So we tell it, the app tells the hub to expect to see it. You get this prompt to say, make sure it's powered up. Once we hit next, it then tells you to press and hold the setup button on the underfloor heating controller until you get this orange and green alternating LEDs. And then once you've done that, you get the confirmation on the app to say that it's added. And the very first thing we've got to do, we've got to give it a name. So I'm calling it Underfloor Heating Controller 1. We could call it whatever it is. You're more likely to call it, maybe say underfloor heating, and if it's underfloor heating for the kitchen or ground floor, you might call it, say, ground floor if you've got underfloor heating on multiple floors. But all we're really doing here is we're giving it a name so that we can address it in the future. So now we're asked on how do we want the boiler contact. So here you can choose between underfloor heating relay, which is the relay in the underfloor heating controller, or you can choose, in this case, I've got a 3-channel hub here, so I've got the choice between channel 1 and channel 3. If I was using a single channel or a 2-channel hub, my options would be the underfloor heating relay or channel 1. So I can choose what fires when there's a call for heat. So here I'll choose channel 3 in the 𝗿𝗲 hub. You then get the confirmation of that, and then you're back to this landing page. So you know this landing page of 𝗿𝗲. This is what you would be doing. It's for as many devices as you're going to add to 𝗿𝗲, you will come back to this landing page. Now, underfloor heating controller on its own is not going to do anything. We need to get some temperature sensing device in the form of a 𝗿𝗲 room stat added and assigned to it. So that's going to be our next job. So the app tells the hub to expect to see a 𝗿𝗲 room stat. You pop the batteries in, give it a couple of seconds, and you get the device joined at the bottom, the confirmation of that. It then tells you what, either mount it on the room clip, on the wall clip, or the stand. And then once you've done that, you then need to give it a name. So this is what room you're adding to. This is assigning it to one of your 16 zones. So we'll call it kitchen because our underfloor heating in this case is in the kitchen. And then you can see we've got this extra screen there. This is what we didn't have before, where we choose what the heating type is. Now, if you leave it at none, all it's going to do is report temperature. It can't call for heat because it's not going to do anything. So we need to change the none from to either underfloor heating, which is what we're going to do, or if this was a radiator circuit, we could pick radiator. But by choosing underfloor heating and confirming it, that then gives us some more options by asking us which underfloor heating channel we want to assign it to. Now, you don't have to assign this to just one. So if you want one room stat to control, say, channel 1 and channel 2, you can pick that. But as it is here, I want it to control channel 1. So I lock that in. And then if I had a floor sensor, which, remember, they're coming soon. If I had one of those and I wanted to use it, I can assign that by using that toggle. But in this case, I'm not using it because it's not available yet. So that's what we would expect to see. So the room thermostat setup, we've assigned it to underfloor heating, and we've then further assigned it to channel 1 of the underfloor heating controller. So confirm that, and then remember, you're back to this landing page. So if you're done, you'd hit done. That will then take you in, and you can see that's our devices page. So we can see we've got a room stat there called kitchen. We've got an underfloor heating controller, which is called underfloor heating number 1. Now, from the control screen, and again, this is the bit that the customer's going to be concerned with, is they've now got a zone called kitchen. The only difference is that so they go in and they can set their schedules, and they can set the room temperature, they can set boost. They don't really know the mechanics of what's going on. All they're saying is that zone called kitchen, I want it to be, in this case, 20 degrees until 10:30. The reality is it's the underfloor heating that's being controlled because that's what you've assigned it to. So again, from the customers, it doesn't matter whether it's radiators that you're controlling or underfloor heating, or indeed as we've got here, the attic, that's actually an electrical heat switch. From the customer's perspective, they go in, they set a temperature for the zone. The WiSER then works out what it needs to do based on what devices are assigned to what zone. Now, just to show you what happens when you're in cooling mode, so when if we're in heating mode, so you can see here there's a slightly bigger system here where we've got a few zones. But if any one of your three, now remember you can have three underfloor heating controllers on a system. If any one of those, you only have to run that interlock, the heating cooling sort of changeover. You only need to run that to any one of them. And in doing so, it will drop it into cooling mode. So, like you had the snowflake symbol on the actual device itself and on the room stat, it's also repeated in the app. And remember, that's just flip the logic. If you're in cooling mode and you call for heat on, say, a radiator circuit, it's just going to be ignored. So that changeover contact sets the precedent. So if you were to go into, say, a WiSER, a radiator thermostat and boost, if you're in cooling mode, the command is just going to be ignored, because ultimately, remember, we are just sending water around one single loop of pipe work. If we're in cooling mode and it's cold water that's going around, then obviously we can't do anything about that unless we drop it out of cooling mode. And this is actually the control screen. So instead of having a flame symbol for a call for heat, you can see here that the set point is below the ambient, and that's why there's a call for cool. If we were in heating mode, there would just be no call at all, because the ambient temperature would be above what the set point is. Now, you're obviously going to want to buy one of these. So the way to do that is to head over to the 9 Degree network, log in using your credentials. And then it sort of splits into two here. You've got the online training on the left, but then you've got the priority shop on the right. And if you go to the priority shop, you can see there is the WiSER underfloor heating controller. Remember, for every one of the zones of the six banks that you can use on that, you're going to need a WiSER room stat. So if you buy a WiSER underfloor heating controller, at the very least, you're going to need one WiSER room stat, but you're going to need as many room stats for as many banks as you want to control. Same deal with the electrical heat switch there. If you buy the electrical heat switch, you're going to need to buy the additional WiSER room thermostat to control it. There's also various deals there on the multi-zone kits and the thermostat kits. We've got the 3-pack of WiSER radiator thermostats as well. So if you've got a job coming up where you need one and you don't want to buy singles, remember, if you buy the multi-zone kit, you get 2 in there anyway, but you can then now buy them in 3s. Good price on the WiSER plug. And also, we've got the new Digistat there. Remember, you use the WiSER app if you want to use the Bluetooth control on the new Digistat. So there's some good prices there as well. So that sort of brings me to the end of tonight's training. I don't see any questions that have come in while I'm live. Let me just double check and be absolutely sure there's nothing going on. No, nothing come in so far. So this will now go up onto the group, and you can re-watch it if you've a mind to. But if you've got any questions, stick them in the comments, and I'll come back to you. Thanks for joining me tonight, guys. Have a good evening, and I'll catch you next week, where we're going to look at the new Digistat in some more detail. Thanks for joining me. I'll catch you soon.